Ryan Ray and Ben Samuels present Bring in the Closers, a podcast on making deals and doing business.
Welcome to another edition of Bring in the Closers. Ryan Ray alongside Ben Samuels. Ben, how's it going, sir?
I'm doing fantastic. Just got in town from Houston yesterday. Looking forward to seeing what you're going to throw at me this week. How about you? What's going on in your life? What's new?
I am been recording podcasts all day, but you know what? We have a guest coming on here in a little bit, but before, I want to ask you a question. Fresh. I've been thinking about this for about the past 3 minutes, so it's really good. No, serious question. Is it just me? And if we talked about this show before, remind me, but is it just me, or is this the easiest time of year to set appointments? Now, next week, it becomes almost impossible. But like this week, give or take a day or two into last week, becomes one of the easiest time of the year to set appointments, it seems like. And
yeah,
appointments, meetings, phone calls, I'm not talking about necessarily person to person, but just getting in front of people multiple ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most in our industry, most people have either, battened down the hatches or waiting for 2020 for budget reasons, or people are, out of the office completely. But if they're in the office, in terms of workflow, yeah, there's a lot more availability for sure. That's what I was doing all day today. I had 4 meetings this morning, back to back on with groups that I was trying to get in front of. And actually, you and I need to talk about something offline. I may have actually found something for you today. So,
wow.
So things are happening.
A charity. That's good to hear. So, one of the things that kind of gets lost, I think, is towards this time of year, we get slow because there's not enough to do, but you don't realize that when you're slow, and everyone's slow, then they have actually more time to see you than in June when everything is just going crazy. And on top of that, you got kids at school, vacation, stuff like that. So it's almost like the psychology works against you because you're like, well, there's nothing to do. It's like, well, right. So go do something.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, especially if you're talking about like the minerals and surface space, specifically in oil and gas, there's certainly, and actually, I guess I say that, there's probably other instances, in markets as well, but there's definitely other. The other side of that coin is that there are some firms, and now this year was a little bit different in oil and gas, and so it may not be as prevalent in years past, but there's definitely an element of, there's some groups that, that have cash on hand that they have to spend for budget reasons, and they need to get it out in the market, because if, a lot of funds are rolled or structured such as, or in a way that if you don't spend your capital budget in 2019, you're going to get a reduced capital budget in 2020. And so there's an impetus to want to spend that money so that you can keep, either keep the same budget or increase it. And so to the degree that people like yourself, you and I can be active in the market right now, there's also opportunities for, I just talked to a firm yesterday, on Friday, about a 1031 deal that they're trying to put together at like the 11th hour because they have this money and they have to get it closed by the end of the year. And so in addition to taking more meetings and being more available, there's also an element of, being, more, if you have your finger on the pulse, you can also find some deal flow that may kind of come your way that may not have otherwise.
And the counter to that would be is that if you come across someone who's really slow and they're bored and they have nothing to do, now's a great time to ask them when they might be busy because their guard's a little bit down. It's a slow time of the year. They're trying to find something to talk about. Whereas when people are in the thick of it, they don't want to give you, well, call me back in 2 weeks or follow up with me here because they're so busy. They don't even want to put that kind of pressure on themselves where right now it's like, oh yeah, well, we had our meeting last week and, middle of February, we're supposed to have our assets coming online and this, that, the other. So it's also a great time to get, you might need to wait to February to find out if they're going to execute or not, but at least to kind of get a schedule about what they think is going to happen, at least Q1 and Q2, because they don't, there's really no pressure, it feels like. So people's, they're not giving you the family secrets, but they will correspond with you a little bit differently, it feels like to me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of an easy way to, or I shouldn't say easy, it's an easier way to kind of get on the docket. You and I talked offline last week. There was something that you're working on that the group basically was like, come back to me at the end of June and let's circle up. And it's like, well, for you and I, that doesn't work, right? Because I'm not going to sit on an idea for 6 months or 7 months, but at the same time, it's really valuable to kind of know the bandwidth, right? And so if a group comes to you and says, I've got availability now, that's one thing. If they say, my dance card is full until third quarter 2020, that allows you to kind of navigate. And so going into December, going into January, you can kind of get a sense of what these firms are looking to accomplish in Q1, Q2, and that'll allow you to be more malleable with the market and be positioned better than most.
The other thing to consider is, and we're not, at least I'm not in this space at all, is but if you look at the Trade One phase deal that just got signed, the news continues to happen regardless of what you are or are not doing. So if you were in the ag space, I'm assuming, even though it's close to Christmas, there's probably potential deals to be had, to be made, to be negotiated, to be finding out the framework of, as this trade deal was announced, as the farmers kind of get excited, they start thinking about, buying tractor for tractor sales. I don't know. It's not my space. I'm kind of, talking out of turn here, but you can see what I'm saying. Whereas, OPEC announced cuts last week. So there is a sense in which the news just goes on continually, and sometimes it's relevant and sometimes it's not, but that's not, the news isn't necessarily concerned with Thanksgiving holiday because that's an American holiday. Now, as you get to Christmas and New Year's and Hannukah, those are a little bit more global holidays, so things will slow down, but things do get announced right before them or right after them. And so it's a good time to also follow the news because there is tidbits that you can go and capitalize on. And the other thing about this time of year is everyone, because they are slow, they are following the news. So at least you have something to talk about with them. Whereas in June, if someone's bowed up and they don't have time to really get their head above water, they may be missing stories. But now you can sit down, you can talk to them, get their opinion, which is another way to get to what they think is going to happen for 2020 or the things that they're concerned about. Because people are kind of following the news now because they're a little bit slower.
Yeah, and actually, this is a great conversation as kind of a lead in to the guest that we're going to have today, who's going to come on here in a little bit. He actually, I don't know if we're going to get into it. I don't know if he's going to want to tell the story, but he has some intimate familiarity with what we're talking about right now in terms of workflow and deal flow going into Q4 and ramping up into Q1. He's working on something that he's seeing that firsthand, and I've been able to kind of see that in tandem with him walking through this deal together. I say together; it's his deal, his baby, but I've been doing some consulting for him on it. But yeah, it's an interesting time of year right now because there's a lot happening, but at the same time, like you said, there's not a lot happening. It's kind of a weird dynamic of business owners like you and I. I'm not looking at I've already planned for next week, right? I've already planned for next month. I'm looking, months in advance in terms of, where am I trying to get to and what's the business model that I'm trying to employ? And then you kind of zoom back into the minutia of the day to day. Okay, so I want to get here. How do I get there? And I think that, this is the time of year where it really helps to kind of, leverage your network and reach out to people and talk, because to a degree, it's weird. I mean, I wonder if you agree with this. I almost feel as though people's guards are a little bit down as well this time of year. I mean, they're kind of more willing to have open-ended conversations about, this is what we're looking to do next year, because it allows you kind of some freedom to talk about those things because they're not concrete, right? Because those plans can change. And so you might be able to ask some questions and get answers to things that you normally wouldn't have. Have you had that experience as well?
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier, actually, is that, because they don't have anything to talk about and there is no fear of what's coming around the corner, when you're bored, you kind of start talking about. I mean, I try to relate stuff to normal human interaction, and so I was with a guy one time, and we're sitting with the client, and the food comes out, and the client's talking, and he's telling us something, and it wasn't like the most important thing in the world, but he was talking. You weren't sure exactly where it's going, and my guy goes to pick up his fork, and I kick him on the table, and he says, "Fork back down." The guy continue the story he went on. And when we got outside, I said, the reason I didn't want you doing that is because when you pick up your fork, he might look at you and go, "Oh, it's time to eat," and stop saying what he's saying. So don't, and that's got nothing to do with just human, how we do stuff. There's a signal being sent, pick up a fork, let me go pick up a fork and eat. So I think what you're saying is true on some level because now there's not a lot to talk about. So if you're trying to find something to relate with someone, unless you're like a engineer who just doesn't say anything, but if you're someone who likes to talk, then you'll probably have some weird, in air quotes, conversations because you're just, there's no work going on and you don't have anything. So I think you are likely to divulge a little bit more just because if me and you don't talk about, we kind of get into some different things than we would normally. So I think that's just, again, part of human nature. So I agree. I think that's why, but I'm not 100% sure.
I'm just, what I took from that is I'm just glad that I haven't gotten kicked under the table yet while sitting next to you. I mean, that's pretty good. That's a win right there.
It's because you sit on the wrong side. If you sit next to me, you'd gotten kicked a couple of times.
That's probably on purpose on my part, but I mean,
Now, with all that being said, I have a counter for you. We said for people like us, it is great to go and to meet and to explore and stuff like that. However, I have been sent a couple of items that are relatively hot for a project overseas. And the timetable is, I'm not sure when, but it seems sooner rather than later. So all the things we said are just true. And now you find out that when you execute those, because everyone doesn't work that way, it actually becomes harder to execute on, right? Because so it's a great time of the year to go, to network, to find out, but to execute, unless you've got willing people, like you were saying earlier, that kind of have a pressure. When I used to dabble in real estate, one of the things I would say is, if someone wants to see your house during the week of Thanksgiving or the week before Christmas, you should show it, because if they're wanting to get out and go show their house, or they're wanting to sell their house, they're probably willing to make a deal. Most people aren't wanting to do that, so therefore they don't make a deal until the springtime rolls around. So the reverse of what we're saying is true. The people you can get in front of, it's a great time, but a large portion of people are checking out. They're not wanting to actually transact. They might be wanting to talk, to meet. So any advice on how to get people to transact or meet during, not transact or meet, but actually transact during this time of year? Because you can meet with them, but saying, hey, here's a hot button issue that we really need to get, is time sensitive. And they're like, dude, I've got a vacation scheduled in 2 weeks. I'd be happy to tell you everything, but actually do something. That's a little bit tougher. Or the pool's a little bit smaller, I should say.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think, my answer to that question in the energy market would be substantively different than my answer in real estate or any of these other buckets, right? I think energy operates fundamentally differently in terms of capital and budget and those kind of things when compared to other markets. So if you're talking about energy specifically, really what it comes down to is that, if the answer is, the firm has rolled up, for 2019 and they're not looking at actively pursuing deals like today, that's going to be the answer, right? There is no rebuttal to overcome that objection where there may be otherwise. So like in your case in real estate, if a buyer, wants to make a deal and they put competitive terms on the table to the seller, they're probably going to be able to get a deal done irrespective of timeline, right? Whereas in energy, you're really tied to the yearly budget and what's actually, trying to be accomplished. And so you might be beating a door down that can't get open kind of no matter how you approach it. And so it's about reading the room. It's about, talking to people that may be able, so if you're talking to, company X and their answer is, we already spent our money for 2019. We're looking at 2020, come back to me mid-January. The follow-up to that might be, do you happen to know X, Y, or Z at another firm that may have a different, capital constraint, or may be looking at this differently? Because to your point earlier about maybe a little bit less of a Chinese wall and being able to glean more information, I might also advocate that if a firm doesn't want to engage with a proposal, but the proposal is sound, but it just doesn't work for that time, they actually may be more willing in this time of year to give you a direct referral to another place that can facilitate that, because it's not as though they're in that degree they're not competing on that deal because they don't want to do it anyways, right? And so they're willing to hand you off to somebody else in that context. And I've had that happen in years past where I was talking to somebody, it didn't work, but they just, they walked me into the door somewhere else and we got it done because they were hungry for it. And those guys are going to be the ones that know the best about, what their competitors are doing and kind of the lay of the land, right?
Yeah, no. So I think we're generally on the same page. The only thing I guess I was considering is on some of these deals, when you're talking about international stuff, it takes multiple decision makers to be involved. And you got vacations, you got travel, you got stuff, and it's not vacation in June.
If there's,
right. Go ahead.
if there's red tape that you're trying to go through and there's a bunch of bureaucracy, I can tell you unequivocally there's nothing happening.
Right.
You're not going to get it done.
And so
like the only way these things get done is if you're walking into this decision maker and he doesn't need buy-in from the other 78 partners.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's kind of recap all this, make sure we're on the same page. It's a great time to get in front of people, a great time to fact find, to network, to hear about what's going on. However, if you need it's a great time to find deals that are teed up, that are easy to transact on. But if you're trying to put together something that's going to take cooperative effort from multiple parties, this time of year is actually probably one of the hardest times to do it, just because some of these deals, as you know, Ben, they don't, it takes time, energy, and effort, and then you don't even know if it's going to be executed on, right? And so this time of year, you go, you know what? I can go to Colorado for a few weeks and ski, or I can spend 2 weeks around Christmas and hope that this deal comes together. So it almost feels like it's more of a risk, if you will. Where in August, you're already in the office, you're already working hard, and so would you agree with that kind of synopsis? So it's great for a lot of things, but it actually has some huge deficits for others. But the perspective seems to be is that everything slows down, you can't do anything, and it's more about making sure that you are picking your spots and making them productive this time of year.
Couldn't have said it better if I tried.
Can you try? That'd be great.
I think at a high level, it's really about. I mean, it's what we're talking about right now. Actually, if the listeners have listened to previous podcasts, this is kind of a granular example of some of the things that we're talking about in terms of structuring your business to be able to take advantage of the opportunity when it comes, but not force the issue and not waste time or spin your wheels on things that are not fruitful. But at this time of year, if you're in a market that has shut down and there's not a lot of deal flow happening, that to me would probably mean that I need to kind of fall in line with that and start planning for 2020 and make sure. And so the other piece of that is you want to make sure that once January 2nd rolls around, you're ready to hit the ground running and go, as opposed to you don't want to be in a position where you're kind of walking in, at least in my opinion, I don't want to be in a position where I'm like walking in January 1 and trying to figure out the landscape and trying to figure out what I'm going to be doing in Q1, right? I want to walk into Q1 with a pretty finite idea of who I can talk to, what deals am I trying to get in front of, and also taking the information that I learned in November and December and leveraging that to make sure that I'm talking to the right partners. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Let me ask you this: December 27th, 28th, 29th, 30th, and 31st. Right? There's 31 days in December. So let's just take off the 31st because it's New Year's Eve. So 27th, 28th, 29th, and 30th. Those 4 days. Have you found that those 4 days for C-suite or higher level executives are actually easier to get in touch with, because by that point they're tired of vacation, they want to go back to work, but they can't, so they don't want to necessarily come and meet for 2 hours, but an email, a text message, something that doesn't infringe on the family time will actually get some pretty good responses, because they're sitting there, they've been at home for a week and a half, and they're like, they have that itch, like, I need to do something. So a nice little email, not happy holidays or whatever, but an email, hey, Ben, listen, working on January 2nd, January 5th, January 15th, whatever, coming to your city, or whatever it might be. Have you found that you got pretty good feedback during that time, if it's not too intrusive, but just enough to let them kind of get that itch scratched?
The one thing I think I would say to that is that while I see what you're getting at, and I agree to an extent, I would caution, or my pushback to that would be, what you're talking about is an already established relationship where you can text the C-suite guy. That week is not the time to be trying to make a new relationship with the C-suite guy and reach out and make contact. But if you already have an established relationship and you guys are already in the fairway of trading ideas back and forth and have that communication style, absolutely, I completely agree with what you said. But those are two. That's a big distinction. Right?
Thank you for clarifying that, because that's what I meant, but I didn't say that. So yes, do not try to go build the relationship for that time period, because then it's the opposite. It's like, dude, I'm with my family. What are you doing? You're soliciting me. Give me a break. But if you know them, you have a good relationship with them, it's like, okay, well, I've watched 14 bowl games today. Let me respond back to this email about something, and that does get missed a lot, because if you think of kind of the C-suite higher manager level, They do like vacations, but they are usually highly driven, highly motivated people, which means that they can unplug, but there is a certain amount of time when they get back, they start feeling it. Man, I need to get back to it. I usually take off the last 2 weeks of the year, but that usually means I have to work at least half the day. I have to work at least half. Now, Christmas Day, New Year's Day, that's a little bit different, but I usually have to work at least half the day, or I will just absolutely, I can't do it for that long a time. So I can take off maybe Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, but outside of that, I'm usually a couple hours here, a couple hours there, checking in, sending emails, responding to stuff, doing my normal. Yeah, I just can't go that long just completely unplugged.
It's interesting because I think that you and I take it for granted to a certain extent. While I think we're both cognizant of it, I think that we don't necessarily give as much credence to the fact that you and I absolutely love what we do. And so it energizes us. And so during that week, we want to be engaged and kind of see what's going on and be involved in work. But there's a lot of people that kind of need that unplug, and they may not be in as fortunate position as you and I are in terms of enjoying their day to day and what they're doing. And so you kind of and so you want to be respectful of that, right? And so it's just about, again, I said it earlier in the podcast. I mean, it's about reading the room and understanding that, like you said, it's certainly not the time to be making new contacts, but also, I mean, there's some people at the C-suite level that want to unplug and don't want to be bothered. And so, if you get, if you send something like in a normal, like in June, if you send an email to somebody and they don't respond, it's probably appropriate for you to follow up three days later, a week later, or whatever, with a phone call or email. During those times, if they don't respond to you, that's your cue that, it's
leave
not
me
the right
alone.
time.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So.
Exactly right. No, yeah, I think you're right. I think it has to be don't get your phone, scroll through it and start an A and work your way all through Z. It's a select few of people. But I guess when you're saying that folks who, don't get energized by their job, one thing I would tell them is, if you want to be better at your job, but you're not energized, for them, the perspective is no one wants to be bugged on the holidays because I don't like my job and I don't want to be bugged. And I'm just saying that that's actually a misnomer as well, because you could go the other way. December 28th, you're sitting in the office going, oh, my job sucks. End of the year, I'm bored stiff. But some high level folks, because you're a good salesperson, it's actually the opposite for those people that might be in there, and it might be a good chance to do it. So couple fast hitters for you. Is it worth sending out the Merry Christmas or Happy Hannukah or Happy New Year or Happy whatever email blast just to make sure someone doesn't forget about you? Or does it get sent in the spam filter and you don't even think about it?
Are you asking me, or are you asking me as the co-host of this podcast and giving you a more sterilized answer?
I'm asking you.
So the way, and I think it's pretty clear for the listeners that have listened to at least one other podcast, because I've probably been pretty consistent about this mentality. I don't waste bandwidth on things that are just run of the mill. I want to make contact for the sake of making contact. And so if the email is literally just to ping their inbox and it's just happy holidays, hope you had a good year, looking forward to talking to you next year, I think that, to a degree, when I get those emails, I generally read them. I very rarely respond to them because it's obvious that I was blasted on a mailing list, and that's not nearly as engaging or personal enough for me to actually want to spend time of my day in responding in kind. Because if I'm going to respond, I'm going to give you a real response. That being said, if somebody like you or let me rephrase, if someone sends me an email and it's clearly written just to me, and it wrapped, maybe talks about something that we had previously talked about or something on the horizon, I think that's really valuable. If you're just going on and for whatever it's worth, for me, if you're just going on Constant Contact or MailChimp and blasting out a holiday letter via email to all your contacts, I would save the time. I'd save the money. To me, I don't think that's worth it. I don't know. What do you think?
So I judge those as two things. One, Ben Samuel's Right Away Company sends me a Merry Christmas, Happy Holiday card, and I talk to Ben regularly, or I don't talk to Ben. I haven't talked to him in 15 years. I had nothing to talk to him about. I hit delete and probably unsubscribe. Now, there is a category of people who I'm trying to get back in front of, and if they make the mistake of sending me one, I'm going to reply back because odds are no one else is. And so I will take that as an opportunity to reply back and try to get in front of someone who, for whatever reason, sent me one of them dumb cards. So I do look for those where, I've been trying to get in front of Ben Samuels for 6 months. He sends me one out on New Year's Eve and I fire one back. Hey man, let's catch up after the new year. Cause now the obligation on some level was back on Ben because he sent me the card and I responded to it. And I took the time to read it when no one else read that thing. So he actually, if he's trying to market and outreach, there is actually a little bit of onus for him to now engage with me. It doesn't work all the time, but I do deploy that tactic sometimes. So if it's someone I don't care about or I don't want to talk to, which would be all of my clients that we work for, we don't send them that stuff regularly because we already talk to them regularly. And we tell them personally, hey, happy holidays. And so I've got a client I'm trying to get in front of, I'm not going to send him the Merry Christmas card because he's not looking at me like that, right? He's not looking at, I need to get in front of Ryan, because if he wants to get in front of Ryan, all he's got to do is answer the other emails, the other calls, the other texts, right? So I look at them from my perspective is I engage with the ones that I want to engage with, and that's because I want to get in front of those people. So usually those people I can't get in front of, but they made the mistake of emailing me here. I'm going to try to capitalize on it. My clients, we already get in front of them. So there's no real reason for us to say that. We say it personally, right? The clients that we want to get in front of, they don't respond to those because they know they can get us any other time of the year. Do you see the distinction? For me, it's about how I receive them. It's only engage with the ones that could benefit me. So I don't send them out because the people who want to engage with me can, and the ones that I don't necessarily want to engage with, which would not be my clients, like some random guy on my contact list that I hadn't talked to in 4 years. I don't want to send him one because then he might reach out and it's not necessarily the time to. So I can bog myself down with those types of things as well. But final thing, if I need to get in front of a bunch of people, I'm trying to just generate something, I might send one out, but that's not where I'm at today. Does that make sense? And Nate looked at me funny. I was not saying I don't send them to my clients because I don't like them. I was trying to say I don't send them to my clients because we already talked to them.
Well, it can be both those things, right?
I love my clients. Every client in the history of mankind, except for you. You're a client I don't like.
And to wrap this up, because we've got our guest coming on here in just a minute. The last thing I would say is, one of the things that used to be standard practice before internet and all that, whatever. What I would do to stand out, have your assistant or do it yourself. Write the postcards, write the notes, because that in and of itself it can be a huge value add. And that that can stand out as opposed to just because especially on those blast emails, it literally says on the bottom of the email something on the lines of this email was sent from cost and contact or whatever, and so it's clear that there wasn't much. The client just put everything in their CRM into the system, right? But if you write the postcard, that comes across substantively different.
Go into Word, type up the email. Copy, paste. I've done that before, so it didn't have the sent from MailChimp. If you're going to do it, pick the top 15 people you want to get in front of, copy, paste, put the name up there, pop, 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 pop. Okay, up next is the gentleman I've had the pleasure of meeting with one time, and Ben has known for quite some time, Percy Engineer, that is his last name, Engineer. I had to get that straight before we got on, who is the president, CEO, head dog in charge over at 8 Energy Inc. over there in the great city of Midland, Texas. Percy, how's it going today, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Well, it is good to have you on the program. Now, Ben sent me a note before we came on and said that I couldn't really talk today because you and him were such good friends and he felt like I would ruin it. So I'm going to turn it over to Ben and let him just, he says he can grill you pretty hard. So I wanted to kind of warn you. He's got it out for you about something. I don't know. Deal that went bad or something.
So the benefit to having this podcast, we're 21 episodes in, is that the listeners, if you've listened to anything else, if you've listened to any other episode other than this one, you know how full of it Ryan is. So I don't really need to disqualify what he just said. But no, I did want to bring Percy on here because Percy and I have known each other for quite some time. Percy, actually, on the show earlier today, Ryan and I were briefly talking about some dynamics of kind of how to approach our business in the energy and deal making space, kind of going into December and rolling into a new year, and kind of what that dynamic looks like in terms of the areas of opportunity that may be on the table at this time of the year, or it's conversely the things that aren't being done this time of year. And actually, I mentioned that you've got something going on right now that you obviously have intimate familiarity with that process. But so I don't want to, if you don't want to talk about that deal specifically or in any specifics at all, no problem at all. But I was curious. I did want to throw it to you and just kind of see what your take on that was. Since you have been an independent broker in this space, for as long as you have, what are some of the things that you're looking at? You're kind of going into December, ramping up into a new year. Is that a time that you find that you're getting a lot more done, a lot less done? Are you able to have more kind of open conversations with people, or do you find that most people have already kind of unplugged or are offline? Kind of, what are your thoughts kind of walking into, I guess we're middle of the month, but I mean, as of, a month ago, kind of where was your mentality walking into Thanksgiving and kind of going into December? And then also, sitting here today, kind of what are you thinking about, or what are you looking at, I should say, going into the new year?
Sure. Well, I always think it's an interesting thing in the oil business, and I can't speak for many other industries, but, once you hit that Thanksgiving break, it seems like everyone gets that holiday mindset on, especially here in Midland. I mean, most people spend their holidays somewhere else, whether they're, going somewhere skiing, going to lake, traveling for family. And so it's a little bit tough as far as dealing with actual buyers and companies we're dealing with. Just that holiday mentality. We used to think that people want to get a lot of things done and closed out by the end of the year, but especially when you're doing deals that require any level of diligence, it's hard between the brokers doing the diligence, between company men having to balance all their paperwork. I just think it's a tough time to get deals closed. Plus, another factor a lot of people don't think about is you start bringing in a bunch of income on a deal. You don't have a lot of time to offset your tax burden. And so some people really look to, delay closings till after the first of the year, depending if they're on the buying or selling side. Where I do think the end of the year comes in really handy, which is what I'm doing right now, is when you're dealing with actual mineral owners and landowners. They love getting those checks in time for Christmas. So you tend to get a little bit better deals. People are more willing to work with you in November and December versus January, February. So, we do a little bit on each end of the spectrum. I have deals that we own in hand that we're trying to sell right now. It's not the ideal time to work those sales, but we're also buying leases and buying deals and dealing with landowners, and it's a great time. So it keeps us busy during that time. Same thing happens in the summer. People get summer mentality, going on vacations. It's a little tough to get some things done. So I really think that after the first of the year till about May or June seems to, for me, to always be the most successful time of year to get business done.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It kind of depends on what market or what segment of the market you're focused on. But you're absolutely right. Landowners and mineral owners, this is the time where, to a degree, I think it is a lot easier to get their attention and to get in front of them. So actually, let's zoom back. I wanted to kind of give the listeners more of a full context. If you want to kind of walk us through, just a little bit of your history in the business and also what you are looking at these days and kind of what you're working on. It seems like from my experience that you certainly are focused on developing relationships with the land and mineral owners, but at the same time you do considerable amount of business for operators and for equity stakeholders as well. And so, what are some of how do you kind of approach this business? How have you found your niche and kind of where do you think you kind of fit into the picture?
Well, I've been doing this about 13 years now that I've been out in Midland as a landman. I went independent around 2010, and I did my first gig for one of the larger public companies here in town that offered me the opportunity to go on my own. And that's where I went from being an in-house contractor, working from an operator on that side of the spectrum, to now being a broker, essentially. And we, built a team over the years. I found that, being independent was great, but I needed some help. So within a period of, maybe a year, I went from just myself to about 21 people. And a lot of that work was client work, bill by the hour, bill by the day, everything from leasing to diligence, title curative, typically all the outsourced functions that operators do. I also was lucky enough and fortunate enough to team up with an independent geologist in town who has a great shop. And he brought me on to do his land portion of prospect generation for him. And so I got to be on the ground floor putting new prospects together, like new geological prospects. And it worked out really well because we got to be there from the ground floor, put these prospects together, lease them up, put them together. And then when we would sell them, a lot of the companies that would buy them were private equity backed companies or just with individual investors. They were small companies, typically didn't have a land department, so to speak. And so a lot of times I would come in and I would function essentially as their impromptu land manager, VP of land. Some of those relationships blossomed and I actually became an equity partner in the company. Sometimes I would just do it in the meantime and then help them build a land department. But what it gave me is the opportunity to see something from the initial geological concept phase through leasing, through development, and also through the sale. After we drilled a few wells, sell it off to a public. Gave me a little bit of a kind of a broad understanding of where I fit into the business. And I think my niche that developed was more on the planning end of leasing, not just taking leases across a broad area. Let's see how many leases we can get in 30,000 acres. But where are those leases? How are we putting them together? Where can we drill to maximize use of our rigs and cut down the number of continuous development programs we have? And so it became a lot of managing and balancing obligations. And that really, people don't think about it, but the land department and the land man running that can really affect how much capital you're putting out. If you can hold the same number of acres drilling 8 wells versus drilling 25 wells, all because you're locating the wells a few feet this way or that way, it can make a really huge difference to your bottom line. I think that was what essentially became my specialty over the years.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. One of the things that I've been consistently impressed by when working with you is your ability to synthesize a lot of information, and you have while you may not have an operational expertise, the boots on the ground, have done that for years or whatever, you certainly know the vernacular, know the lingo, know what those things take, what it takes to put together a drilling program or those things. You also have a mastery on the land and mineral and leasehold side and how to do the contracts things and that piece as well. While also you have the fantastic relationships with the mineral landowners, and so you kind of have a somewhat mastery on kind of the full stack process. And so depending on what deal you're working with or depending on, what stakeholder or equity holder you're speaking to, you can be in that room and be very comfortable. Some of the deals that you and I have worked on together, you've built independent financial models, which is something that the run-of-the-mill landman or broker head can't do or doesn't want to do or doesn't have the know-how to do or whatever. Well, that can be a huge value add. And so, I'm curious, was that through technical training? Did you go through, was that like schooling, or did you kind of just learn from osmosis? If you can kind of give us a peek behind the curtain, I'd be curious kind of how you picked up all of those things to kind of come together. Because, I think what you provide in the market is relatively unique that, like I said, depending on what room you're in, you can be very comfortable in that room, depending on whether it's, operations all the way through lease acquisition. So, how did you start in the business and kind of, how did you get to that point?
Well, so prior to me becoming a layman, I was in the military. I did that for about 10 years. And, excuse me. And one of the last gigs I had for the Army was in Afghanistan, in Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan. This was back in 2005 and 2006. And I was sent there and I was put in charge. I was what's known as the battle sergeant. In what they call the Base Defense Operations Center. So essentially it's like a mission control center for the northern third of Afghanistan, let's say. And, I was a pretty young guy to do something like that. But what I found was we had a bunch of moving pieces. And the key was, how did we put all those moving pieces together where it comes to on-base assets, defensive assets, offensive assets, aircraft, airspace? How are we utilizing patrols? How are we using all of our individual pieces of technology, and how do they all fit together? And that was essentially the most formal training I had in that. And it was a learn by doing process, but I did it. I was actually fairly good at it. And I think that became kind of the stepping stone for the rest of my life on how I looked at looking at all the different pieces in an organization or a project and how they fit together. And that's essentially what I used when I had my first in-house gig working here in Midland for an operator. I was given essentially a county. A whole county is Howard County and the northern part of Glasscock County. And at the time, this was before the big shale push came in. We were mostly drilling vertical wells. And I had a pretty large number of acres I was managing, roughly, I want to say about 83,000 acres. And as a pretty green landman, it was just here's the keys, make sure you're handling everything. So it's figuring out ways to look at all of our different leases, put them into prospects, managing all the different continuous development programs and obligation dates to keep that acreage. So had to work with the engineers, had to work with the regulatory people, had to create essentially my own different systems in place, whether it's different spreadsheets and maps, and how to go from the old days of Xeroxing maps and coloring things in with highlighters and colored pencils to doing them on a computer, working with the GIS people, and essentially figuring out ways to make very simplified systems of reporting, like a simple document you can give to the engineer, the owner of the company, to see here's the facts and here's 2 or 3 of our options. What do you want to do? And a good friend of mine that got me in the business, he always presented that to me. He said, when you're working with people, always present them A, B, or C, because that helps limit their decision making and it cuts down the time to make decisions. And so using those different things over the years in the military, through working at this company, it was kind of a way of seeing how everything fit together and how to maximize the use of our resources, especially when it comes to managing 30, 40, 50 different continuous development programs on your current leasehold, and how to manage those rigs. And so it worked really good. You never lost a lease the entire time I was there. There were a lot of close calls. There's a lot of coming in on the weekends and working, being able to work your time in to get to see certain key people. And I think that's essentially that's what was my stepping stone to when I went on my own, on how I worked with a lot of these companies and how I still do it. I have a few clients I work with. I don't work for too many clients as far as people that just pay us for our time. But the ones that do, I always keep my own set of all their information, so I can call them at any given time and say, hey, just so you know, we've got this area, these leases can expire. We need to drill a well in this spot to hold this many acres. And sometimes that slips through the cracks on their end. So it becomes kind of a really good relationship that way, when you can help either the companies you're working with or people you're just doing deals for, even in the past, to keep everyone on schedule and on time. Nobody wants to spend $20,000, $30,000 an acre and then lose leases. So I think the sum of all those experiences over time have kind of led me into my niche, and I enjoy it. To me, it's fairly easy, but there's a lot of moving pieces to look at, and it's not for everybody, but it works for me.
So let me shift gears here for a second. One of the things that you mentioned is you've dealt with publicly traded companies, PE-backed firms, and one of the things that I had to learn years ago was a lot of the people we interacted with were kind of field office folks. And so you'd go in with blue jeans and your steel-toe boots on or whatever, and your fishing shirt, and you'd go and talk business or whatever. That's fine. And then I rolled up into downtown Houston, and I was like, oh, wait, something's changed here. And I had to kind of go through that process of learning how to speak that language, dress that dress, kind of walk those floors, and while being able to go and deal with the folks in the field. Midland is obviously uniquely positioned because it is out there right next to the field, if you will, but it does have large publicly traded companies and small PE-backed firms. Kind of walk me through how you've had to learn to adapt to walk into different rooms and be able to speak the language, dress the right dress. Was that a process you found difficult, or did it come naturally because maybe Midland's a little bit better mesh of all those worlds together?
Well, that has always been an interesting thing out here, especially when I got into being a broker for companies. I tend to consider myself a little bit more of a city folk, so I tend to dress a little bit more formal when I go to work. Excuse me. And but it did cause some issues. Primarily for me, it was not as much dealing with the people in the field offices and at the companies I worked with. It was more when I'm heading out to the field to deal with landowners or guys that actually work out in the field. Then you see, you throw on your pair of jeans. I drive my pickup that day. You do those kinds of things to get along. Nobody wants to see a guy dressed up in a sport coat with some loafers on, showing up in a fancy car to meet with a landowner in the field. So there's definitely a lot of perception out here, and it's very interesting. And I can't speak if that's the case in many other industries or not, but here I find, I've always said this, I think Ben and I have talked about this over the years. The oil business is a very emotional business. Deals happen or don't happen based on how much somebody likes you, based on what they may have heard about you through the grapevine. There's a lot of people in the business, but in a way, it's a very small world. And so there's this constant level of perception management that you need to do to make sure people see you the right way and know what you're all about. And so even when you're off the clock, there's this big component of being a salesman, including, like you mentioned, how you dress, how you carry yourself, how you talk. And I think that's really important, especially, myself. I'm a minority. When I joined into the land field, there weren't a whole lot of us then. There wasn't a lot of diversity at the time. And so, I often joke about my friends at one of my old companies I used to work for. Everyone thought I was somebody else because they associated my name with a different person because of the way I looked. And so there's a lot of these little perceptions you have to get over and work with. But, luckily over time, I like to think that with the changing demographic in the workplace, just in every industry, we're starting to see some of those changes come about. And, naturally we also change too. Hey, I wear boots every day, little things like that. And it really helps you fit in. It helps you blend well with a lot of people. And you like to think at the end of the day, if you conduct yourself professionally, that's really all that matters. But I think you're right. There's a little more to how we carry ourselves and how we appear to others to make everyone feel comfortable.
It's interesting to hear that perspective because, if it was up to me, we'd wear Crocs and shorts and fishing shirts every day. But that's just not, that's just when I'm in my office and no clients come in, I can do that. But kind of hearing your perspective from being a minority when it was less diverse to more diverse, kind of navigating those streams, it sounds like the one thing that you've done, and this is part of if you want to do sales and negotiations and things, is you want to be true to your personality and things like that, but you do have to make slight tweaks. One of the things I've kind of tried to advise people on, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, is I generally like to say I want to be 80% of who I am no matter what room I'm in. So when I'm with my kids, they see what they see is a different 20% than when me and you are meeting, but generally the same person is who they see. But obviously I'm different from my wife than I would be someone else. So I like to use the 80-20 rule, if you will, to say that 20% is going to be different no matter where you are. So that means if you put on a different pair of boots or you wear a different shirt or whatever, so be it. If you don't, you're a little quieter, but generally as long as you can be the person. But it feels like people get hung up on all these other things when really just a slight tweak here or there, you can still be who you are. You can still, hit a lot of those things that people like to hit. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think when it comes to work, especially people that have known me for years that I've worked with versus people I meet now, you like to think you're the same person. We've all known people in our lives that take on very different persona between their work life and their home life, or even different aspects of their personal life. Excuse me. And I think that can cause people more problems in the long run. I think if you're, me, I like to do things to help people out. And I try to be the nice guy all the time. And that's essentially who I like to think I am. And so as long as you maintain that persona, some guys look like the tough deal maker. Some guys, like to look like different sort of personalities. And that's not really me. I think, if you just kind of be yourself, who you are, I think in the long run, that really does benefit everybody. And plus at the end of the day, it really comes down to then, what do you know and what are you contributing? That becomes the most valuable thing. As long as you stay consistent, hopefully that aspect of you is what shines.
Okay, we're going to let you go here in just a minute. Save the toughest question for last. You said you want to help people. Can you help me on how to get Ben to do anything, to make him productive, to get him to accomplish, close a deal? I've been trying for months now, failed repeatedly. I'm willing to take the L here, but as someone who Ben looks up to openly, we have listeners who might be curious about this. He seems to act, or is he paying you to act like he's better than what he is? Just parse it out for us before you get off here today.
Oh gosh, life's all about choosing battles, and some battles you can fight, and some battles you just got to step aside and just say it is what it is. So
that's a skill negotiating tactic right there.
Yeah, that's right.
Percy, that was a good answer to that question. That was well crafted.
That's how it's done. Like that was next level. That's how he does. Like he's if you notice we did, he started, oh gosh, wow. Like he was sympathizing with me. He got my guard down, and then he said ultimately, hey, I'm not going to answer your question. I don't know you as well as I know Ben. Go mind your own business. But he did it in a way that softened the blow. So Percy, that was very, very well done there.
So Nate, can I make a suggestion that when you put this thing online, can we make the title of the podcast "Perception is Reality"?
Perception is Reality. or Percy is reality.
Oh gosh, I don't know about that.
I know we're getting ready up as the clock over real. Ben, anything else for Percy before we let him go? Any other questions or things that you want to follow back up on?
Yeah, I mean, I'll hand it off to you. I mean, if there's anything that you want to either promote or talk about on the podcast that that we haven't gotten a chance to talk about, I know that you're in a pretty dynamic space, and like you said, I mean, you do a number of different things. And so, if there's something you're working on that you'd like to promote, or if there's something that you just want to plug, we'd love to give you the floor for a minute.
Well, I think the only thing I really like to say that it's becoming more and more apparent over these last 2 or 3 years is, it seems like in our business, and I'm sure this is the case in other businesses as well, everybody's always looking to get something out of every deal, every relationship, and I think sometimes that's a short-sighted mentality. I think the thing I can tell if I were to speak to a bunch of people that are in the same kind of business that we do, especially deal makers, I would say, not every deal is one you have to benefit monetarily off of. Sometimes help your friends out, get connections made, and do things like that without expecting anything in return. Because to me, those are the ones who've always paid the biggest dividends in the future. So sometimes it's okay just to help people out, work with them, give them some of your time and some of your knowledge. And you'll find that people sometimes will do that back to you in return. And when they do, it's always worth more than the time you put into it.
Yeah, first, it's interesting you say that. I had a conversation with somebody earlier this week, and we were talking about how often deals don't come together, or there's really no substantive conversations where there should be, simply because somebody, one side or the other of the table doesn't want to, open their cards and show, and actually have an honest conversation of back and forth. And it's very much, I'm not going to tell you what I've got going on, but I want you to tell me everything that you have happening, so I can kind of, poke my finger on what you have, but what I've got is going to be behind closed doors. And I think one of the reasons that you and I have connected so well over the years as we have is that we both see that situation just like you outlined. It's, if we're going to have a conversation, we're going to sit down and work together. Let's kind of open the cards, talk about openly what we're doing and how we can benefit. And to your point, that may be monetary, it may be relationship built, it may be that someone that I don't, but I'm trying to get in front of them. And so by consulting on a deal, my quote unquote pay is going to be the introduction that I'm looking for. And so I love that dynamic of just being able to kind of play ball more openly. And being willing to find the win wherever it is, as opposed to being strict about, okay, if I'm getting a deal, I need a 6% cut, and if I'm getting 4%, I'm not going to do it, sort of thing.
Absolutely. And I think we see so many deals fall apart over those small details, and it doesn't really need to be that way. I feel like the people that helped over the years get deals done, and I may not have made a percentage or had a real role to play. It's worked out well because those people remember you, they work with you in the future, they bring you things. And I like to think sometimes the long term will pay out greater than the short term.
One of the things, and before that you go, Percy, I wanted to point out was we had a guest on a few weeks ago, and he talked about the Lamborghini. And if you go back and listen, listeners, you can catch that. Ben, one of the things I wanted to point out while Percy's still on here, the thing that stood out to me most about all the things he said, if you remember, go back to his first answer, he said, out here in Midland. And if you've keyed into what Percy said repeatedly, it's out here in Midland, this industry. I don't know about other industries. And one of the things that's been, that's ringing true is that he's really spent time thinking through the farmers, the big companies, Midland culture, the change in demographics. It's very niche, and that's probably given him an advantage instead of being concerned about what happens in Houston. Because the question I asked was more general, and he brought it back to Midland. And it sounds like, and I don't know what you do, but it sounds like his business is Midland focused, and so he really has spent a lot of time honing in on what actually happens in Midland, and that's really the most relevant information for him to transact on a deal. Percy, did I mischaracterize you anyway? Because that's been very helpful, because as I think about dealing with South Africa or China or wherever, I'm a little bit more all over the place. But those same things are true, because how we transact in South Africa is fundamentally different than you do in Midland. But it feels like you've really tried to master the art of doing deals in Midland.
Absolutely. I mean, I've done a little bit of work in various places around the country over the years, but I can't say that I really have a feel for the culture there. And I think culture is everything in business. I think so many things happen and don't happen because of that. I know this area fairly well, and I know a lot of people in this area. And I think that's what's benefited me. And so I always seem to bring it back to that because this is my bread and butter out here, and I think it'll continue to be so. And so I think that's good to focus on what we know and expand on that versus maybe sometimes trying to spread ourselves a little too thin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, just to interject here, for the listeners that are watching the video feed of this, you'll see that I'm in a pretty casual gray sweatshirt with a hood, and I took 4 meetings this morning, all with C-suite level people, and I don't think I underdressed anybody. I think everybody was like kind of in this semi, this kind of garb. And so, again, to Percy's point, and similarly to me, the vast majority. I mean, I took a couple of contract jobs outside of Midland, but the vast majority of my business in terms of the energy space is in Midland. So similarly, I've taken the time to figure out that dynamic because what I'm wearing right now. There's no way I'd walk into basically any office in Houston or Dallas like this.
Not a single office.
I would have to have at least a minimum, button down and slacks. And so I'm wearing this sweatshirt and I've got jeans and casual boots on, and that's more than appropriate out here, but it wouldn't be elsewhere. And so yeah, I mean it really depends on your environment. Out here in Midland, even more so, than who you're meeting with. It's you got to kind of play the part. And Percy, without getting personal or kind of steering the conversation in a down a rabbit hole, I think one of the other things that you and I share and that we addressed is and I think you said it for briefly. The way that we, you and I look is relatively similar, and it's a little bit of a different look than you see out here in Midland. And so that was, for me at least, coming into Midland, that was one more hurdle that I needed to make sure that I was kind of jiving with with the mentality out here, because I wouldn't be able to wear a suit and a Rolex and a 3-piece suit out here because that would. In addition to that dynamic, I think the way that I look would also, kind of emphasize that in a negative way. Does that jive with your experience?
Oh, absolutely. I remember when I came to town to interview for my first job, I naturally wore a suit, and I was sitting with the office manager, and she was interviewing me, and the owner of the company ran in a little bit concerned. And after a minute, he said, "Oh my gosh!" She goes, "Oh, you're here interviewing." I thought we were being served. I thought it was some attorney coming from out of town. And he's like, people don't wear suits around here. Right. So I learned that one pretty quick. Yeah, absolutely. I think that also takes. I'm a big fan of be who you are, and part of that is how you dress, how you look, how you carry yourself, your humor, your music, everything. But I think at the end of the day, you also have to adapt to your situation. And I had to adapt quite a bit. And, I was in my mid-20s when I came out here. So we're still learning and growing as a person. Here I am, I'm 40 years old. I'm a very different person than I was back then. A lot of it is a result of the local culture that I am, finding out who I am as we grow. And so there's a lot of those little things that can make a big difference to people, especially when you're in a place that's slightly smaller and people maybe aren't as used to that much diversity of not just of race or ethnicity, but things like just hobbies, mindset, mentality, just different things like that. So I think you always just got to be aware of that. And especially in the business world, you have to, know your audience and, be yourself, but at the same time, don't make people uncomfortable.
Okay, well, Percy, thank you so much. I've got to meet you once, I believe, maybe twice. Once, I know for sure. It was a pleasure. You did have a nice office there, and you did dress nice. So all those things are true about you.
Thank you.
We will hold it against you that you consider. You didn't say you considered being a friend. Think about it, so we won't hold that against you. Thank you for coming on the show, and we'll hopefully get you on again in the future if you still talk to Ben. And hope you have a great Christmas, Hannukah, Festivus, New Year's, wherever it is that you celebrate this time of year. And we will hopefully talk to him again next year.
That sounds great. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Have a great holiday.
You too.
Thanks.
Take care.
All right, Ben, that is it for Percy. Final things I will say, we're up against the clock, is that his repeated focus, you can just tell by everything he says, is surrounded by the Midland culture. And if you're going, well, I'm not in Midland, that's not relevant. No, it's actually more relevant because you heard how much that plays into him. And as Ben and him talked about, they do, I am a white guy with brown hair or black hair, brown eyes. I look like most of people in Midland, Texas, per se, or especially Louisiana, where I come from. Ben and Percy don't fit that demographic. So for them, there is different things that they had to come to. two things that were encouraging. One, it wasn't used as something to get angry at everyone about. It was just viewed as, I have to overcome this. I have to figure out how to work within this. And you still can be successful in it, but that requires that you actually focus on what is important. And when you talk about international business, Ben, I can tell you that is like the top thing. It's building relationships, understanding culture, getting involved. It's not pick up the phone. Ben Samuels, will you see me on Tuesday? Yes, you will. Let's go close the deal. It is a very long process, so you really have to tune into that. So it was really refreshing to hear someone who was really focused on what they did. And it might have almost, if you're not paying attention, it sounds like, well, I don't know much. It's actually, he knows a lot, because it's really focused on one thing, which is, makes him probably good at what he does.
Yeah, I mean, I think really what Percy just did is we talked for about 30 minutes and we kind of cleanly kind of rolled a bunch of the things that you and I have talked about at length on the previous podcast, kind of in a half an hour. I mean, we talked about the forethought of who you're meeting with and what the dynamic is and kind of how to present yourself, how to communicate, how to network. All those things. So I think today was really valuable to kind of crystallize some of those things. And like you said, it was Midland specific in terms of his specific advice, but you can extrapolate that into other markets. It's the same language, right? And especially, I think it's also valuable, someone like yourself who's out in the Dallas area, or someone that that's not out here in Midland. If you want to do business out here, you can't get off the plane in a suit, and so even if you're not out here, it's valuable to kind of know what you're stepping into if you do happen to venture out here to close a deal or talk to a partner or what have you.
So final takeaway is know your area, your demographics, like Percy knows his, and you will be on the way to success in 2020. Ben Samuels, I hope you have a great Happy New Year, Hannukah, Festivus. We need to do Festivus. I feel like that would be good. I've got a lot of things I need to get out with you, so we need to have that, the feat of strength and all that stuff. So let's get that done. Happy Christmas, Merry Christmas, New Year's. We will be back next year. Ben might close the deal. That would be good. You took 2019 off. I'm hoping you bounce back in 2020. So listeners, we will talk to you then. And that's it.